No one believed what happened to my father, even after that famous YouTuber went missing for a week in the same stretch of woods, but Dad was the first to be taken. My father and I had decided to go camping to help celebrate his promotion at work. He was a seasoned camper, but I was relatively new to it all. We spent most of the day riding our dirt bikes through a few of the trails towards the bottom of the mountain, but when the sun started to set, we decided to make camp for the night. We set up our tents, and I gathered some firewood with Dad. We got a pretty decent-sized fire burning before eating dinner and toasting some marshmallows. When the sun was completely gone, I was generally afraid of how many stars there were. Being from the city meant I was only used to seeing a few stars in the night sky. But out there away from civilization, it was as if I could see the entire galaxy, and it was unsettling. Further putting me on edge, the sounds of the various nocturnal insects buzzing and chirping was a lot louder than back at home. There weren't any howling wolves, but there was the occasional owl hoot. The trees even groaned a little, swaying in the gentle breeze that blew between them. Dad decided it would be fun to tell a ghost story, and for one of the stories he had to act out one of the scenes. He stood beside a tree, but as he acted out the scene, I noticed something was carved into the bark. "What do you think that is?" I asked, standing and pointing at the symbols. He frowned a little, disappointed I wasn't very interested in his ghost story. He turned his attention to where I was pointing and continued to frown. "I'm not sure. I kind of noticed it before, but I guess my brain automatically assumed it was just one of those Jack loves Jane messages kids like to carve into trees." He leaned down a little and stood in a way that allowed the light from the fire to flicker off the tree. I followed suit. The symbols had been organized into a diamond pattern, carved a few inches deep into the bark. And it looks like a tool was used to carve this, Dad said, running his finger along the inside of one of the larger symbols. "It's extremely..." Dad jerked his hand back and sucked on the tip of his finger. He chuckled a little. "Well, I was going to say smooth, but it cut me, so I guess I'm a little wrong." As Dad spoke his sentence, the insects stopped buzzing and chirping. The owls stopped hooting, and the gentle breeze that blew through the trees turned into a strong gust. The wind blew some dust into both of our eyes, and we tried to clear them with the back of our hands. We went back to the fire and sat down, but Dad didn't stop rubbing his eyes. We didn't speak for a few minutes, but when Dad stopped rubbing and looked at me, I gasped and almost scooted back. I can't see," he said, blinking a few more times. "Your eyes," I started, pointing at him. I had expected his eyes to be a little red from irritation, but instead, both of his eyes were black now. At first, I thought they were gone, but as he moved them around trying to look at things, I could tell they were still there, just completely devoid of color. "Dad, I think we need to go to the hospital or something. Your eyes are completely black, like they're covered in soot." "That would make sense, I guess. Maybe that gust of wind blew some into my eyes. I can't see a thing." "Okay, here, I'll help you," I started, standing up and moving towards him. I grabbed his arms and helped him to his feet. My mind raced with possibilities when it came to getting help. Since we rode separate dirt bikes to the campground, there was no way he'd be able to ride without vision. It was possible we could walk the bikes out and I could guide him, but that would take forever. "Dad, maybe we can walk the bikes out? I could help you so you don't run into anything. Does that..." But before I could finish, I glanced at the tree with the symbols. I was petrified. There on the bark, about a foot above the symbols, was a set of eyes glaring at us. There were no eyelids, just two eyeballs wedged into the bark, as if someone had carved out two holes and pushed them in. What is it?" Dad said, bending down to rub his leg. "Why did you stop?" But it took me a minute or so to formulate a response. I took a few steps back and pulled him with me, and the gaze of the eyes followed us. "There are eyes on the tree," I whispered, as if the eyes would hear me and get angry. "What? Like potato eyes? Like the little white things that sprout on potatoes?" Before I could answer, Dad winched and dropped to the ground. He started rubbing his leg even more, and I lifted up his pant leg. Sure enough, like his eyes, his leg was pitch black, including the hair that would normally have been brown. I looked at the tree again, and to my horror, I saw that it now had a leg towards the base of the trunk. I looked at the eyes again, and though it was hard to confirm due to the low lighting and distance, I swore they were my father's eyes. But instead of being filled with love and compassion like my father's usually were, these eyes were devoid of emotion, just staring at me like a spooky wooden doll. Dad started rubbing his other leg, and I stood up, stepping back. I felt guilty about it later, but my thoughts shifted towards personal preservation as I questioned whether whatever was happening to him was contagious. He started rubbing his torso and his arms, and a few seconds later, the tree took on those body parts as well. No, 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 I started saying as Dad started rubbing at his face and scalp. Then he stopped moving, becoming a completely black, motionless figure beside the campfire. My heart was racing a mile a minute as I looked at the tree. Embedded in the trunk was the image of my father, complete with his face, which was now twisted into a morbid grin. I shook what used to be my father a few times just in case, never taking my eyes off the tree. When he gave no response, I grabbed the keys to both bikes and hopped on mine. I didn't care about our camping supplies or bother putting out the fire. Instead, I turned the key in the ignition, sighing in relief when it started. Movement on the tree caught my eye, and I watched in terror as the embedded body strained against the bark. It pulled most of itself out and was only connected at its back by a few twigs and bits of bark for a while before finally breaking free. It never blinked, glaring at me and smirking. When it took a step forward, I twisted back the throttle and sped off, daring a glance every second or so, but happy I'd taken both keys so it at least couldn't pursue me on the bike. I almost biffed it a few times, but managed to make it back to the main road, and then back to my house a couple of hours later. It was the middle of the night, but I banged on the door until Mom opened up. She brought me inside and calmed me down enough for me to try and formulate what I had just witnessed. I tried explaining exactly what happened, but it was too far-fetched for her to believe. She kept shaking her head and saying I was in shock, asking why I had left my father at the campsite. A firm knock at the front door pulled both of our attentions, and Mom opened it. There at the threshold was the beast from the forest that had assumed my father's identity. It didn't say a word, but my mom fell on it, embracing it as if she hadn't seen her husband in years. It locked eyes with me, and my heart nearly beat its way out of my chest. I tried to convince Mom that Dad was dead, and the thing that had come home that night was a monster with unknown intentions. But she refused to listen. I even managed to take the cops up to the campsite the next morning, but Dad's body was gone. The symbols were still carved into the tree, but now there was an additional symbol above the others. Since the cops found nothing and Mom refused to believe me, I had no choice but to move out. A few others have gone missing, and I know they were taken by the same creature. And one day, I'll figure out a way to fight them. Until then, the best thing I can do is spread awareness.
My father was a police officer. One morning, he was acting strange. I watched as he walked into the kitchen, wearing his uniform. Headed for the coffee maker on the counter, he poured some into his favorite blue ceramic mug before sitting down across from me on the small, round wooden table. He brought the steaming blue mug to his lips. The smell of fresh, hot coffee filled my nostrils. It wasn't long before I had noticed the bags under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Taking occasional sips from his coffee, he numbly stared out the window to the backyard. His dark brown eyes seemed distant and filled with concern. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked worriedly. The words seemed to make him snap from whatever trance he was in. "I'm fine, kiddo," he sighed. Just eat your breakfast. It was more than clear that something was wrong, but I knew my dad. If he didn't tell me after I asked the first time, then there'd be no point in asking again. So, I just nodded and went on to pour some more cereal into my bowl. As a couple minutes went by, I watched as he pushed back his chair and got up from his seat. "I gotta leave for work, buddy. I'll see you tonight." He chugged down the rest of his coffee and set the empty mug on the table, making a small thud as the ceramic hit the wood. He barely even looked at me as he walked out of the room. Later that night, I was woken up to the sight of my dad, sitting on the edge of my bed. The room was dark, but the dim, yellow glow of the hallway light creeping through the crack of the slightly ajar bedroom door was enough to help me make out the serious look on his face as he sat there, staring down at the floor. Confused, I turned on my side to look at the bedside clock on my nightstand. It read 2:45 a.m. I turned my eyes back to my dad. Is he just getting home from his shift? I asked myself, perplexed. After rubbing some of the sleep off of my eyes, I noticed he was holding his gun. "Dad?" I muttered, my gaze fixed on the Glock in his hand. "You know that I love you, right, kid?" he blurted out, still staring down at his feet. That caught me off guard. He and I hardly ever said that to each other. Don't get me wrong, my dad and I had a great relationship. We just weren't good with that kind of stuff. Yeah, I said, as I sat myself up. I know. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the living room, almost making me jump out of my skin. It sounded like the front door had been kicked open. My dad turned his head, focusing on my direction of the bedroom door for a few seconds before returning his gaze back down. I watched a mix of fear and sorrow wash over his face as he let out a tired sigh. "I should have known it'd be back," he mumbled under his breath as he shook his head. "What do you mean?" "I'll always be with you, you know." He breathed suddenly, still not looking at me. "Dad, what's going on?" I uttered, as dread started to spread through my body like a wildfire. "No matter where you go, no matter what you decide to do with your life, I will always be with you." He tightened the grip on his gun as the words escaped his lips. "Please, Dad, just tell me what's going on." My shaky voice pleaded with him. "I love you, son," he said as he finally turned to face me, a serious yet warm look on his slightly wrinkled face. "I love you too, Dad." It was always hard saying those words to him, but right then they left my lips without me even realizing it, almost like a reflex. At that moment, part of me felt I'd regret not having said it more in the past. "Now, promise me you won't get out of this room until you hear the front door open," he demanded, with a sharp look in his dark brown eyes, as he stared straight into mine. "What?" I muttered. "Why?" "Promise me." He raised his voice, inching himself closer to me. "Why?" I pressed. Usually, raising his voice was all it took for me to do whatever he told me. But not this time. I was too scared. I needed to know what was happening. "Just promise me, son." His voice cracked as he placed his hand on my shoulder. For a second, I thought I was going to see him cry for the first time. I couldn't form any words. The shock of seeing him like that, something I thought was impossible, knocked any form of speech out of me. So, with trembling lips and watery eyes, I just nodded. He sniffled and looked up at the ceiling for a few seconds, as if trying to make imminent tears fall back. With a sigh, he brought his gaze back to me and pulled me close, placing a kiss on my forehead before getting up and trudging towards the door. He stopped right as he reached the door and turned around to look at me. "I'm gonna do my best to end this here, once and for all." He then turned back around. Standing there, he looked down at his weapon and pressed the release button on the side of his pistol, extracting the magazine. After making sure it was full, he popped it back in and pulled back the chamber, making a satisfying click that echoed through the dark room. Gun in hand, he grabbed the doorknob, and I watched as he twisted it and pulled it open, then shutting it behind him and leaving me in complete darkness. Sitting in my bed, in that pitch-black room, I waited and listened, my body shaking as I counted the seconds, not knowing what was about to happen. Suddenly, a single gunshot echoed through the house and was quickly followed by the rapid thuds of inhumanely fast footsteps. It sounded like a hammer hitting the hardwood floor 100 times within a second. A wet, munched sound echoed through the walls, accompanied by a loud grunt from my father, which was followed by a loud crash and the splattering of glass. And just like that, it all went silent again. I just sat there, heart racing. I wanted to run, to hide, to scream, but I couldn't move. It was as if my mind was wide awake inside a dormant body. Minutes that felt like hours went by. Sitting there in complete darkness, I waited, building up the courage and telling myself I needed to do something. I needed to see if my dad was okay. Suddenly, the turning of a handle and the creaking of the hinges sliced through the silence of the night, and I watched in horror as the door started to slowly open. The silhouette of a man stood in the doorway, the faint, yellow light of the hall coming from behind him. It was hard to tell if the man was standing across from me was my dad or an intruder. I sat there, not able to make a sound, waiting and hoping to hear my dad's voice emerge from the figure. Mere seconds seemed to drag on for an eternity. My heart was thumping against my chest, beating so hard I could feel it pulsating in my throat. Out of nowhere, a car slowly drove past the house, and the headlights flashed through the gapes between my curtains, just enough for me to see the blue of my dad's uniform and the shine of his badge. Letting out a sigh of relief, I felt the tension in my body easing up. "Dad, you scared the hell out of me. What's happening? Did someone break in?" Whatever relief I felt before was ripped out of my chest as I watched my dad drop to all fours and crawl to the dark corner of the room. My mind started racing. This isn't my dad. This isn't my dad. This man is not my dad. It's amazing how quick our brains can switch from relief to absolute terror. I tried my best to remain still, hoping that somehow it was going to keep the man crouched down in the dark corner to my right from hurting me. The whole time, I could feel him staring at me. I could hear his raspy breathing just a few feet away from me. Let me tell you, feeling the full effect of adrenaline while your body is frozen with fear is like torture. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest at any moment. Somehow, I mustered up the courage to turn my head in the direction of the man. As soon as I did, he started to slowly rise himself up. The loud cracking of bones echoed through the room as he did so. A cold, numb feeling sank in the pit of my stomach. he was now standing up. At that moment, the only thing I can think of was the lamp on my bedside table. I needed to see him, to see it. Carefully, I reached out for the lamp next to me, and with the pull of the cord, the whole room was bathed into an orange shade of light. Staring at the man, my eyes went so wide they could have popped out of my skull. What I saw made my heart sink. He wasn't wearing my dad's uniform. He was wearing my dad's face. That man, that thing, whatever it was, it had carved my dad's face off and was wearing it like a damn mask. Blood was still dripping from it, running down the man's neck and streaking the blue of the uniform. I just sat there, terrified, eyes bulging, as the man stood in the corner, watching me. Through the holes where my dad's eyes used to be, I could see how lifeless the ones that replaced them were. The man tilted his head as he stared at me, almost as if he was admiring the sight in front of him. I don't even know how long he stood there. An hour? Maybe 2? Out of nowhere, he dropped on all fours again and crawled out of the room with inhumane speed, making loud thuds as his hands and feet hit the floor. Even after he left, I still sat there for what must have been hours, still frozen. Eventually, I finally gathered the courage to go look. With my bare feet pressing against the cold hardwood floor, I slowly stepped my way towards the now wide open door of my bedroom. As I entered the living room, my eyes scanned the place in search of my dad, but he wasn't there. His gun was on the floor, next to the pile of glass shards in the frame of the broken coffee table. There was a huge trail of blood leading from it towards the wide open front door. I just stood there for a while, staring into nothing. The curtains swayed as the wind entered the house through the open door. After a while, I don't even know how long, I was finally able to snap out of it and call 911. After loads of questions, most of which I didn't have the answer to, they promised me they would catch whoever did this. They said my dad was one of them, and they wouldn't rest until they caught the bastard. It's been 20 years. They never did. I lived with my Aunt Gemma until I turned 18. I went to college, got a business degree, and did well for myself. I'm 36 now, same age as my dad was when it happened. After all this time, I never really understood what happened to my dad. For most of my life, I avoided the topic like the plague. However, on my 36th birthday, my Aunt Gemma called me to congratulate me. But as we were talking, she said the strangest thing. "Oh, sweetie, and don't you worry about it. It was just an awful coincidence," her voice said through the phone. "What are you talking about, Aunt Gemma?" I replied, confused. "You know, the whole thing with your father and grandfather, and turning 36. It was just a freaky and horrible coincidence." "Aunt Gemma, you mean, what happened to Grandpa?" "Your father never told you?" "No, he didn't." "Oh, then it's better that way, sweetie. I don't want to worry over nothing." I tried my best to get her to explain, but she refused, and I ended up dropping the subject. How stupid I was. Anyways, It's been 2 months since I had that conversation with my aunt. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because about an hour ago, I looked through the window in my office at home and saw someone standing by the curb under the street light in front of my house. They were wearing a hoodie, which made it hard to see who they were. I was finally able to see their face when the person looked up at me. It looked like my dad.